Number 10. Superman. In the comics, Bizarro is considered to be a character meant to represent the opposite of everything Superman is, despite looking extremely similar to him and with a very similar but somewhat twisted power set. Originally, Bizarro was created by Lex Luthor, but would later be given his very own world that he hailed from in regards to his origin. Supes has fought his dark reflection, Bizarro, in the comics on multiple occasions, even facing him in a Harley Quinn comic at one point in the early 2000s. And now the two have even squared off in the live-action TV series Superman and Lois, where Bizarro is also revealed to have his own alternate Earth that he hails from. Number 9. Jean Grey. Jean had to fight against the darkness within herself when she was possessed by the Phoenix Force and ultimately corrupted by its power after being taken in, brainwashed, and mistreated by the Hellfire Club. Fortunately, in the end, she would win out and would sacrifice herself in order to save the world. At least, so it seemed. In reality, this wasn't Jean at all, but a construct of Jean that the Phoenix Force had made, while the real Jean was asleep at the bottom of a bay, resting in sort of a healing pod, if you will. Jean, however, has also fought against her evil clone self, Madeline Pryor, who looks just like her and was created by Mr. Sinister using a piece of the Phoenix Force to be Cyclops, aka Scott Summers' perfect mate after Jean's supposed death as Dark Phoenix. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about, maybe even more superheroes who fought themselves, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Harley Quinn. Harley not only ends up in an accidental fight against herself, but she also ends up in a makeout session with herself. Of course, this all goes down in one of my favorite Harley series that I have actually yet to read in full, and yet I always come back to for some of the most fun Harley Quinn moments, Harley's Little Black Book. One day I'm going to read this series in its entirety. I'm going to read every single panel, every single page, one day. It's a Harley team-up series, and in issue 4 we see her use Superman's balls. No, really, they're green and red science-y balls that she took from his Fortress of Solitude in the near future that basically allow her to travel back in time to an alternate reality known as DC Bombshells, which centers primarily around the time of World War II. Harley doesn't really directly attempt to attack her DC Bombshells counterpart, but she does get knocked out by the time paradoxicalness of their meeting and is then kidnapped by Bombshells Harles and her team of super gals, as they initially do not trust the Prime Earth Harley. And then later she gets to kiss herself, which I feel like would probably be pretty weird, but also pretty cool if you gotta do something like that. I don't know. Number 6. Green Ranger. Green Ranger Tommy Oliver usually is tempted by the dark side, but in the end he always comes back to the light. Except in the case of his future self, Lord Draken. This is a story of Tommy who stayed evil, and when Tommy travels to a dystopian future where Rita Repulsa has won, Lord Draken is one of her top dogs. And Tommy is forced to face his own evil future self. This happens in a story arc of Boom Studios' Mighty Morphin Power Rangers that begins with the seeming destruction of Zordon and the Power Rangers' home base. From there, Tommy plummets into a possible future, and while the other Rangers back home are trying to find him, Tommy, in the future, manages to befriend the Rangers of this reality. Those of his friends, at least, that are still alive here. While the Rebellion and the Rangers attempt to take the battle once more to Rita Repulsa and her loyal generals like Lord Draken on this alternate Earth, Tommy squares off directly with Draken in issue number 14 of the series, and their initial one-on-one here does not go so well. Don't worry though, Green Ranger fans, Tommy fares better on the rebound fight in issue number 16. Number 5. Moon Knight. Moon Knight fights himself on a constant basis, at least himself in regards to, his other personas. They don't always agree on the best course of action, and they don't always get along. And then there is his brother, the other fist of Khonshu. No, we're not talking about Randall. Hunter's Moon. But at one point, Moon Knight also fought a straight up evil version of himself, and not within his own psyche either. And we're also not talking Khonshu, which sometimes is presented as an alternate persona of Mark's. We're talking about Moonshade. Moonshade is an evil doppelganger of Mark Spector's Moon Knight that was created by Magus. Moon Knight faced him and other heroes' evil doppelgangers during Infinity War when Magus attacked Earth. Moonshade actually attempted to absorb the powers of 616 Franklin Richards and all the Moon Knights across the multiverse, but fortunately, Mark, with some help, stopped him. Number 4. Invincible. It's Mark versus a team of evil Marks. In Invincible, Mark has to face a whole assembled league of his evil selves, similar to what Batman would go through later in the DC universe. These evil versions of Mark were rounded up by Angstrom Levy, a supervillain in the Invincible reality who, due to a misunderstanding, pretty much hates Mark completely. This is an attempt to get back at Invincible, who he knows is Mark Grayson. Previous to this attempt, Levy also tried kidnapping Mark's mom and his younger brother. Levy promised the evil alternate Marks each something they wanted, in general, more power in exchange for their help in defeating Mark and destroying his universe. However, it wouldn't go so great for them, or for their main continuity Mark, really. While the fight completely ruined Mark's reputation for a time and resulted in the death of Guardians of the Globe member Rexplode, in the end the evil Marks would be defeated. And kind of brutally so in some cases. Number 3. Raven. In a way, when Raven turned dark, she actually had to fight against herself with the help of her friends to save herself. Okay. Sounds more confusing than it is. I mean, it's kind of confusing, but it's not as confusing as it sounds. Raven basically had succumbed to the corruption of her evil consciousness, and because of this was known as Dark Raven for a time in the comics. Back at the New Earth continuity, to just clarify that for you. She crashed Nightwing and Starfire's wedding and implanted what she claimed were evil seeds in Corey when she kissed her, or at least like opened her mouth on top of her mouth. It looks like a kiss to me, so I'm gonna call it a kiss. However, it turned out that the spirit of the good Raven was also implanted in Corey, which would later be Dark Raven's undoing, or if you will, Raven's soul self. Eventually it came down to a fight between Starfire with Raven's good half and Dark Raven. Dark Raven was defeated and Good Raven was born again, being given a golden spirit body. Raven in the Prime Earth continuity has also fought a more direct version of herself, albeit an evil alternate one, and even though this version of Raven claimed that going dark was inevitable, the Prime Earth version refused to accept this to be true and beat her evil self back in order to protect her friends. Love it. Evil Raven's like, you're gonna become evil anyways, deal with it. But Raven's like, nah, I'm gonna pass. I'm gonna not be evil and then I'm gonna beat you. Number 2. Doctor Strange. In the film Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange ends up fighting against himself. That's what happens when you start traveling around the multiverse. You're bound to run into an alternate version of you, or a few of them. And either you're gonna become friends with them, you're gonna make out with them, or you're probably gonna fight. Or maybe all of those things. Who knows? Main continuity MCU Steven and Designated Earth 838 Christine Palmer end up getting sent through a portal to a dying world where an incursion has seemingly already struck, destroying most of this alternate Earth. However, a decimated alternate Earth Sanctum Sanctorium and its Doctor Strange still remains somewhat intact. This Doctor Strange has been corrupted by the Darkhold though, which main continuity Steven actually kinda needs in order to travel back to his world, so the two are forced to fight it out. But it's not just any fight, it's a classical musical fight created using music done by Danny Elfman that not only pits Strange against Strange, but also pits Beethoven against Bach. What a classical battle. Number 1. Batman. Batman has had to face many different versions of himself. In fact, at one point, he has to face a whole team of evil alternate versions during the events of Death Metal. This is the team of dark multiversal alternate Batmen and women and dinos who have been brought together by the Batman Who Laughs, one of the most evil versions of the character to have ever existed. Thank goodness Batman also had his fellow heroes and friends there with him, and he also gets the powers of a Black Lantern, because fighting this many dark reflections of himself ends up being a lot of work, even with all the experience that he already has of just facing the darkness within himself. This is that, but like tenfold, and then of course made manifest in multiple separate physical entities. So it's like if you had to fight yourself, but then it was a physical fight, but then it was like a whole team of you that are all evil in different ways. Sounds really hard. I wouldn't want to do that. I guess that's why I'm not Batman. Or am I Batman? You'll never know.
Number 10. Zoom and Eobard Thawne. So there is more than one Reverse Flash. There are more than 2 Reverse Flashes. At first it was like each Flash had their Reverse Flash, but then it kind of evolved beyond that. Since, well, Thawne hates Barry, but not really Wally. So Wally was given his own horrifying Reverse Flash in Professor Zoom. Made all the worse because Zoom was his friend, which always made all the things he did, like causing Wally's wife Linda to miscarry their first set of twins, particularly hurtful and horrifying. However, when Barry came back, so did his nemesis. So now there were multiple Reverse Flashes zooming around, bad pun fully intended. Well, these two met. Also, you're supposed to call them different things. Thawne is the Reverse Flash, and Hunter Zolomon is Zoom. Great name, Hunter Zolomon. So in comics, these two shared a brief exchange about teaming up, but then the New 52 happened, so none of it mattered. Another version of these characters appeared on the CW show, and while all Flashes are crossing paths there, so it's to be expected, I'd be more surprised to find a lone wolf Flash at this point. They're both really scary. People like to play the who is better of these Flashes games, but I wouldn't want to face either of them. Number 9. Harley Quinn's White Knight. So this one is low like our last number because this is two separate people, but they are set up as alternate versions in a way. And this Harley Quinn case is too intriguing not to discuss. In Sean Gordon Murphy's Batman White Knight, a reformed Joker is confronted with the fact that there are two Harleys, which in a metatextual context represents the different presentations of Harley Quinn over time. And if you're looking for a deconstruction of both versions and how they both have changed, both have merit, and why someone could prefer the classic depiction that doesn't descend into angry screeching and table flipping about co-signing abuse or there can be only one, then this is the comic for you. There can be only one. Highlander for life. One of Harley's strengths is the variety of discussions she opens up and the different types of tales that can be told, and this story takes advantage of all of that. Harley's early depictions have merit, people, as does tweaking it for better or worse. Nuance, my favorite thing. Layers, like an ogre. Read it. I will let you peel them back for yourself. Number 8. Spider-Man and Carnage Spider-Man from the 90s animated series. I don't care how janky the animation is by modern standards, it's still a decent show, story-wise. And it makes some good attempts at adapting some pretty complex plots. Plus, with all the characters that appear in it, some have dubbed it the first MCU. So one of its more lofty adaptation attempts was of the Clone Saga and also a Spider-Verse style finale featuring the Beyonder, wherein Peter had to team up with alternate versions of himself from across the multiverse to combat a crazed version of himself driven over the edge by the horror of his life and bonding with the Carnage symbiote. This Carnage Spidey was also pretty horrified when he could see past the symbiote's reasoning, that is, to what his life had become and what he was doing. So what was he doing? Say it with me now. Trying to destroy the multiverse. He would be swayed to try to stop his plan from meeting Uncle Ben, from a universe where he had survived, and yet Peter was still Spider-Man, but he was more like a Tony Stark Spider-Man, arrogant, rich, etc. None of the other ones liked him, his suit was silver, I don't know. This series was good, it's not just my nostalgia goggles, I swear. I only have those on for the theme, which is very aggressively 90s.
Number 7. Wolverine. At the end of X Deaths 10 Lives of Wolverine, a Wolverine event that spanned 2 series, X Deaths of Wolverine and X, pronounced actually 10, Lives of Wolverine, Wolverine is forced to fight and defeat himself. However, this version of himself is no longer fully flesh and blood, no longer human, but instead has been fully infected and overtaken by the techno-organic virus which infected him and fully took over his body after Moira McTaggart used Forge's demutinizing gun to remove Wolverine's X gene, thereby negating his healing factor and turning him into a phalanx. At least, you know, the techno Wolverine. Not the Prime Wolverine. Sounds weird saying Prime Wolverine, not the main continuity Wolverine. In a final fight in X Deaths of Wolverine issue number 5, Wolverine is forced to put down his techno counterpart, defeating him once and for all with some pretty useful help from Sage, who has reprogrammed the Cerebro Sword to be useful in the fight against fully Phalanx Wolvie, also referred to as Omega Wolverine in the comics, or at least from an editorial standpoint. I don't know if I think they do call him Omega Wolverine, but at the beginning, when they're like, these are all the characters. Omega Wolverine. Number 5. Flash. Many people have worn the mantle of the Flash, and because of that, there have been times when Flash has disagreed with Flash, or even faced another Flash, or multiple Flashes. In this case, I'm focusing on the time Wally West became possessed by Famine, one of the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse, which happened during Future State. As Famine, Wally West's Flash had to face Barry Allen's The Flash and the other speedster members of the Flash family, many of whom are also known by the codename Flash, but not all of them are. Barry was attempting to rescue Wally when he faced him the first time, but as a result of this fight, where Jay Garrick actually lost his life, he would be forced to accept the fact that Wally could not be saved and would have to be killed. But don't worry though, this was Future State, so that's like an alternate reality, and that's like an alternate future that probably ain't ever gonna happen. Wally gets to have his family back and be happy now, so yay. Number 4. Scott Pilgrim. Well, Scott Pilgrim might not be the most altruistic hero, he is the protagonist of his own story and is a hero in his own right. And he definitely kind of has like superpowers, he can basically punch you into coins, so That's pretty crazy to me. A bit of a flawed and sometimes selfish hero, but that is part of why we love him. I mean, we're all flawed and inherently as people sometimes selfish, or at least self-absorbed. It's kind of what it means to be a human being. So it just makes him more relatable. Scott in his story, whether we're talking the graphic novel or the film, has to face Ramona's 7 evil exes in order to keep dating her. But even after he seems to have succeeded in this quest, defeating the final evil ex, Gideon, he must face another potential evil ex, the embodiment of his old self, everything about Scott that is negative or evil, aka Nega Scott. However, this fight is actually quick and painless in the film, as Scott and Nega Scott just end up talking it out, instead of coming to like actual physical blows in the end. And they even agree to have brunch together and hang out the following week. So it all worked out. Sometimes you fight yourself and you actually end up becoming good friends with yourself. How nice.
Number 3. Thanos versus Thanos. Why yes, the Mad Titan has fought himself. Of course he has. I'd fight myself. Probably lose. Alternate me probably took the time to learn some form of fighting, probably fencing. That'd be cool. Thanos number 18 sees older Thanos fighting young Thanos. Is the older version of you an alternate version? I'd say yes, because you don't know if you'll ever end up in that future if we have free will and timelines and all that stuff. Wibbly wobbly timey wimey. We're all changing on the journey of life. This was actually kinda sweet. So young Thanos has to kill old Thanos so he can achieve his dream of finally being with Death, who seems at this point in time ready to be with him. Just a heartfelt moment between tyrants and killers, you know, tugging at your heartstrings. Sure, years ago he snapped half the galaxy in a big temper tantrum, but does that mean he doesn't deserve love? Villains need love too. Just look at all our villains couple lists. What's the use of all that power and money if you have no one to abuse it with? Number 2. Kid Loki, Adult Loki, King Loki. So many Lokis. So Loki has existed in many forms. Classic Loki, crazed Loki, sexy female Loki, the first sexy Loki, Kid Loki, modern MCU-avised male hipster Loki. So Kid Loki was Loki Laufeyson, and old Loki was the more crazed version, and they've all met in the metaphysical space and talked. Old Loki killed Kid Loki. It's all been very dramatic. I mean, Kid Loki was on the Avengers and people liked him, and nobody's ever really a huge fan of Kid Death. Loki is much more than the MCU version, people. He has a rich history. Currently, because of the Disney Plus series, they're trying to make him cohesive in hopes of horizontal marketing. Even though, let's be real, there's not that much overlap between people who go watch things and people who turn around and read comics after because of it. They tend to be separate. It happens, but not in huge droves. And that's not a bad thing. Let comics be its own medium that stands on its own. I will die on the hill that it's already complete. The adaptations they're making, they're just a cherry on top. The comics are the cake. And I don't know about you, but I want the cake. Number 1. Apex Lex. Apex Lex, the name that I can't take seriously but love saying. So this is part of the latest Year of the Villain storyline over at DC, latest at the time of this recording, which is leading up to something big. Well, Lex has discovered the dark multiverse and its creator Perpetua, and the fact that according to her vision, villains are the destiny of the universe, so he feels that humans should become apex predators, hence Apex Lex. He fused himself with Martian DNA to do this, mileage varies on that part. So in his own Year of the Villain comic, he went across the multiverse, and can you guess it? What'd he do? Say it together, class. Killed the alternate versions of himself, except for one that he's keeping as a backup just in case. It's dark, and while Lex unbound from his thing with Clark is odd, I don't know. How do you feel about Apex Lex? I just want to say it again. Apex Lex. Are you digging it in Year of the Villain in general, or is it more of a meh for you? Let me know down below.
Number 10. Professor X. Professor X fought a version of himself in the form of a Mummudrai. His Mummudrai, of course, to be specific. That's right, we're talking about one of the first fights Charles ever fought, while he was still in the womb. This was against Cassandra Nova, his Mummudrai twin. Charles as a baby sensed that he was in danger from Cassandra, and in response, his mutant powers activated, before he was even born. Professor X is so underrated. He fought back against Cassandra and defeated her then, but unfortunately she would still survive. While the baby was delivered but said to have not been alive upon birth, Cassandra would actually live on as a collection of cells. Down in the sewers, she would bide her time, growing for herself a new body, so that one day she may return. For those who are unfamiliar with the Mummudrai, they are presented as being a version of the self known in Shi'ar mythos as representing the anti-self. The Shi'ar believe that one must fight and defeat their own Mummudrai before they can be born. Number 9. Ben 10. Ben is also a hero, albeit one from the animated series Ben 10, where he is also the protagonist. Ben has had to face many different adversaries and monsters, including his own future self. I love a good evil future self fight. Initially, when we're introduced to Eon in the series, his true identity is a mystery. However, it would later be revealed that he was an evil alternate version of Ben, similar in appearance to Ultimate Ben or Ben 10,000, as he is known, but of course, evil. Eon planned to absorb both Ben and Ben 10,000 so that he could change the timeline, but would face off against Ben, Kevin, Gwen, and Ben 10,000 and ultimately be defeated. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, head on over to our Facebook, show some love for the channel there, it really does help us out here. Number 8. Wonder Woman. Recently, Wonder Woman had to fight a dark reflection of herself, one that perhaps came from within her own psyche. We are led to believe that this version of Wonder Woman is what she is destined to become. The true darkness within herself made manifest, the God Queen of Asgard. Honestly, with her look, she reminds me of death metal Wonder Woman that we got to see when she was, Queen of the Underworld. In reality, however, the fight with her own dark reflection is quite short because, well, it isn't actually her future self at all, but is simply an illusion that was made by Dr. Psycho, aka Cisco, who is also off-world with her as she travels Asgard on her quest.
Number 6. Crisis on Two Earths. So this movie, was from 2010, and it was yet another instance of the Justice League meeting the crime syndicate. So this was Justice League, Crisis on Two Earths, and it had just the hottest Superwoman. Can we talk about Gina Torres' voice and just her? No? Well, just know that she's a goddess. This was a fun introduction to Earth 3, for those who may not have already been familiar with it. You got to see the good Luthor, Owlman, Ultraman, Johnny Quick. I would be so annoyed if I was Johnny Quick. Your alternate version is just a straight up verb and your name sounds like a breakfast cereal. It's always cool to see the Justice League go up against their alternates, and the crime syndicate are a cut above. Plus they have a lot of soap opera drama going on. It's a decent movie. Give it a watch if you have the time. Number 5. Dark Beast and Beast. So Dark Beast comes to us from the Age of Apocalypse storyline and was a mad scientist who had given in to his darkest nature because he was working for Mr. Sinister in his breeding pens. By the end of that storyline, he had managed to escape to the main reality, 616. It looked like he had died, but he had instead been cast back 20 years into the past, so now he was older than Mainverse Beast. This made him responsible for creating the Morlocks because he was cast back into the sewers. It was a thing. He would later kidnap Mainverse Beast, so that's one way to meet your alternate version. He would try to replace Beast on the X-Men, but found it hard to deceive them because Beast had a higher knowledge base than them, was also just better at interacting with people. So to combat this, he started killing Beast's childhood friends, just stopping short of killing his parents. So yeah, suffice it to say, these two have beef. Dark Beast goes hard, except for killing parents. Genetic experimentation on kids? Fine. Killing your own parents? That's where the line is. I'm glad to know there is a line. Makes my villainy so much easier. Number 4. Doctor Doom and Future Doom. Doctor Doom is no stranger to time travel, dimension hopping, meeting alternate versions. It's all in a day's work, a week's work, a life's work. So when Doom and Iron Man were sent forward in time to 2093, where the world had reverted back to Arthurian times and legends and styles and just the whole 9 yards with a punk tech edge, so look forward to that, Doom met the future version of himself, and well, he was not impressed. He thought his future version was unworthy, relying too much on tech, and well, he just kept himself alive that way. He had allied with future Iron Man, Tony's descendant, and was getting around that way, and Doom was having none of it. Despite future Doom having a pretty credible grasp on the world, he was pretty impressive. Doom gives him a speech that basically boils down to dignity. Always dignity. And then kills him. You don't embarrass Doom, he can't handle it. Remember when Doom was hot in canon and only had like a tiny scar and that was why he wore the mask? I remember. Doom is vain about both his physical appearance and how he presents himself.
Number 3. Deadpool. Deadpool also sometimes is known as his own worst enemy. But other than fighting against his own nature, he has also fought a literal evil version of himself. This version of Deadpool is simply known as Evil Deadpool. He was built from pieces of Deadpool that were collected over the years by Dr. Ella Whitby, who was once Wade's psychiatric doctor when he was in prison and was revealed to actually be obsessed and in love with him. After this patchwork version of Deadpool came to life, it was revealed that he was basically like the opposite of Deadpool, and where Deadpool was a hero, an anti-hero at least, Evil Deadpool was, well, very evil. Initially, Deadpool killed evil Deadpool by sacrificing the cure he had found for himself. It would have cured him of his healing factor, leaving him powerless and allowing him to die, which at that time was what he wanted. Deadpool was hoping to use it to end the pain of living for himself, but instead he sacrificed the cure to get rid of his evil counterpart. Don't worry though, that wouldn't be the last we'd see of evil Deadpool, who was far too fun of a character to kill off permanently after that first encounter. Number 2. Green Lantern. Green Lantern versus Green Lanterns galore in this story, War of the Green Lanterns. Here we see Hal Jordan take on a ton of Lanterns who have had their minds influenced by Parallax. Only a few Lanterns are immune, and they also happen to be some of the most well-known and prominent Lanterns in DC Comics, such as fellow Green Lantern John Stewart. A small group of Green Lanterns, including Hal, John, Kyle Rayner, Guy Gardner, and Kilowog, must work together to save the rest of the Corps from Parallax's influence and to also save the universe from Krona, the Guardian behind this attack who plans to control the Guardians under Parallax's influence so that he can rule the universe. Number 1. Sentry. Sentry is his own greatest villain. So when Sentry had to face Nemesis, he was actually just facing himself. Literally. We're talking about when Sentry took on the Void, which is the greatest villain the planet has ever seen. Or, you know, one of them, because there's a lot of villains that claim that. And also happens to be the other dark persona residing in Robert Reynolds. Without the Void, the Sentry cannot exist. At least, that is what Bob was made to believe. Well, initially it was thought that the world was made to forget about the Sentry in order to protect the Earth from the Void, which also kinda like came as a package deal with him. It was later revealed that the idea of the Void was actually placed into Reynolds' mind by none other than Mastermind, who also made the world forget about the Sentry. The Void likely only manifested because Mastermind made Bob believe that should the Sentry ever return, the devil would also appear and attack the world. Hence the manifestation of the Void. While Sentry battled the Void on many occasions, there are times that the Void has acted as a hero when the Sentry refused to be active at all in using his powers.